Welcome back to our Legal Snippet Law Simplified series. This is our 10th deep dive, and today we're getting into a really important recent Supreme Court ruling. It's Sadhana Tomar versus Ashok Khushwah.
That's right. And you share some great material on this.
Yeah, and what jumped out at me is how this case seems to really widen the net on who can actually claim compensation after a motor accident.
Exactly. That's the core of it. It's about who qualifies as a legal representative.
So our mission today is figuring out why this ruling matters, what it actually changes, practically speaking.
Definitely. We'll unpack the case itself,
Okay.
the accident, what the lower courts decided, and then how the Supreme Court stepped in and, well, changed things with this broader view.
Okay, sounds good. So, to get us started, let's set the scene. What's the background here?
All right. So this goes back to September 2016. The incident was in Gwalior, Madhya Pradesh.
Okay.
A young man, Duraj Singh Tomar, just 24 years old, he was riding in an auto rickshaw, and tragically, the auto overturned. The courts later found it was due to rash and negligent driving by the driver.
Awful. So, naturally, his family, his dependents, they sought compensation.
Yes, they did. Initially, the claim was filed considering his mother, his wife, and his son as the dependents.
Makes sense.
They claimed his income was around 35,000 rupees a month from a fruit wholesale business and sought compensation of about 28.5 lakhs.
Okay, a substantial amount based on that income. How did the first court, the Motor Accidents Claims Tribunal, the MACT, respond?
Well, the MACT took a different view on the income. They assessed his notional income much lower, at 4,500 rupees per month.
That's a huge difference.
It is. They did add 40% for future prospects, which is standard procedure. But then they deducted 1/3 for his personal expenses. And crucially, they didn't consider his father or his younger sister to be dependents.
Okay, so that exclusion, combined with the lower income figure, must have significantly reduced the award.
Absolutely. The final award from the MACT came out to ours, 9,077,200 plus 7% interest. Much lower than what was claimed.
So the family wasn't satisfied with that outcome, I imagine, especially excluding the father and sister?
No, they weren't. They appealed to the Madhya Pradesh High Court.
And what happened there? Did the High Court see it differently?
Not really. The High Court reviewed the case, but ultimately upheld the tribunal's decision. They agreed with the MACT's assessment.
So still excluding the father and sister, still based on that lower income figure?
Exactly. So at this point, the claimants, still feeling this wasn't right, took the final step. They appealed to the Supreme Court.
Okay, and this is where things really shift, right? This is the core of our discussion today.
Precisely. The Supreme Court zeroed in on a couple of key things. First, that income assessment. They questioned how the lower courts arrived at that 4,500 figure.
Right, especially for someone running a wholesale business, even without perfect records.
Yeah, the court acknowledged that proving income in informal sectors is tough. There aren't always pay slips or, formal books.
So how did they approach it to set a fair baseline?
They did something quite practical. They looked at the Minimum Wages Act notification from 2016, the year of the accident.
Okay.
It set the monthly wage for an unskilled worker at 6,500 rupees. So the court used that as a more realistic minimum benchmark for his income.
Ah, I see. So that pegged his annual income higher at 78,000 rupees.
Correct. A definite step up from the MACT's calculation.
And what about the multiplier, the calculation based on his age for future loss?
On that point, the Supreme Court actually agreed with the High Court. They used the multiplier of 18 based on the deceased being 24 years old.
Okay.
And they cited the established precedent for this, the Pranay Sethi case. So no change there.
But the big one, the really fundamental question, was about who qualifies as a legal representative, wasn't it? The whole issue with the father and sister being excluded.
Exactly. That was the crux. The tribunal and High Court had taken a narrower view. The Supreme Court asked, well, is that interpretation correct under the Motor Vehicles Act?
It feels like a common sense question, doesn't it, if they relied on him financially?
You'd think so. And the Supreme Court looked back at previous judgments to support a wider view. They referenced a key case from 1987, Gujarat SRTC v. Ramanpai Prapatpai.
Okay. What did that case establish?
It basically said that a legal representative isn't strictly limited to just the spouse, parents, or children. It can be anyone who suffers a loss because of the death in the accident.
So it focuses on the impact of the death, the dependency, rather than just the formal relationship label.
Precisely. It's about who is actually left worse off. And they didn't stop there. They also leaned on a more recent case, N.J. Azri v. Cholamandalam MS General Insurance from 2022.
And did that reinforce the point?
Very clearly. The J.S. Reed judgment stated explicitly that legal representative under this part of the Motor Vehicles Act needs a broad interpretation.
Why broad?
To serve the Act's purpose, which is fundamentally benevolent, it's about providing relief to the victim's family. Restricting who counts as family, the court argued, undermines that goal.
So the key test is proving loss of dependency, not just fitting into a specific category like parent or spouse.
Exactly that. If you can show you were dependent and suffered a loss due to the death, you should be considered.
Okay, so applying this broader, more purposive interpretation to the Sadhana Tomar case, what did the Supreme Court conclude about the father and younger sister?
They looked at the facts and found that, yes, the father and the younger sister were not financially independent. They did rely on Dhiraj Singh Tomar's income. So based on that dependency and the precedents like Romana Papadpai and Jazri, the court ruled that they absolutely fell under the definition of legal representatives and were dependents.
That makes a lot more sense in terms of reflecting the actual family structure and support system.
It does. And recognizing them as dependents had a direct impact on the calculation.
How so? Did it just increase the number of people sharing the award?
It changed the calculation itself. Specifically, the deduction for the deceased's personal expenses.
Right. The initial deduction was 1/3?
Yes, which is standard when there are, say, 2 or 3 dependents. But now, with 5 dependents recognized mother, wife, son, father, and sister, the court revised that deduction down to 1/4.
Okay. Acknowledging that with more dependents, a smaller fraction of the income would likely have been spent solely on personal expenses.
Exactly. It reflects the reality of household economics better.
So with the revised income based on minimum wage, the inclusion of the father and sister, and the adjusted deduction, what was the final compensation amount?
The Supreme Court recalculated everything and arrived at a total compensation of Rs. 17,052,500.
Wow, that's significantly higher than the nearly 10 lakhs awarded initially.
It is. And that figure included not just the loss of dependency, but also amounts for loss of estate, funeral expenses, and loss of consortium for all 5 dependents.
Loss of consortium for all 5, that's interesting too.
Yes. Recognizing the loss of companionship, care, and affection extends beyond just the spousal relationship in this context.
And what about liability? Who had to pay this amount?
The court didn't change the lower court's findings on that. The driver was driving without a valid license.
Okay.
So the driver and the owner of the auto were held jointly and severally liable.
And the insurance company's role?
The High Court had directed the insurance company to pay first and then recover the amount from the driver and owner, a pay and recover order. The Supreme Court didn't interfere with that part.
It's quite a journey through the legal system. Did the court comment on the time it all took?
They did note it. It was about 1 year and 10 months in the MACT.
Okay.
Then nearly 4 years, 3 years and 10 months in the High Court.
Wow.
And another year and 10 months for the final decision in the Supreme Court. It really underscores how long these processes can take for families seeking closure and compensation.
Definitely. So wrapping this up, this Sadhana Tomar ruling feels like a really positive clarification, especially within our legal snippet theme of simplifying law. It makes the application of the Motor Vehicles Act more, well, just.
I agree. It's a significant step. By firmly establishing that legal representative isn't a closed list and depends on actual financial dependency, the Supreme Court has aligned the law more closely with, how families actually function and support each other.
It emphasizes that inclusive justice idea, doesn't it, looking at the reality of the situation?
Absolutely. It reinforces the idea that the act is there to provide meaningful relief to everyone genuinely impacted by such a loss, not just those fitting neat categories. It's the judiciary interpreting legislation to meet societal needs.
So for everyone listening, this case really shows how interpreting one term, legal representative, can make a huge difference. That wider interpretation the court stressed is key.
It is, and it leaves us with a thought, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What does this mean going forward?
Yeah. How will this affect future claims? Will we see more claims from, say, siblings, grandparents, or others who can demonstrate dependency?
Potentially, yes. It certainly strengthens the argument for anyone who is financially reliant on the deceased, regardless of their specific relationship title. It shifts the focus firmly onto proving that reliance.
And how might insurance companies react or adapt their assessments based on this precedent?
That remains to be seen, but they'll certainly need to factor in this broader scope when evaluating claims and potential liability. It could change how dependency is investigated and established.
Fascinating stuff. Hopefully this deep dive has given everyone a clearer picture of this important ruling and its potential ripple effects in motor accident law. Thanks for breaking it down.
My pleasure. It's a really crucial development for access to justice in these difficult cases.